France's President Emmanuel Macron is hailing the G7 summit in Evian as a moment of cooperation and unity following months of disagreements. U.S. President Donald Trump echoed the positive messaging today, capping 3 days of relative harmony among leaders of the world's 7 top industrial countries. Our Brussels bureau chief, Katharina Kroll, was there, and she sent us this wrap of the summit.
Donald Trump arrived at the G7 summit at the French lakeside resort of Evian, looking a little tired, but in a good mood and notably right on time.
Everything is very nice, thank you.
And he arrived carrying good news, a framework deal designed to end his war with Iran, the conflict that is putting the global economy under stress and drawing heavy criticism back home.
The deal's all signed, and the strait is already partially opened. As you know, they're doing a little hunting for a couple of mines that they've already found. But it's essentially ships are starting to go out now. On Friday, it'll be completely opened.
Even though many questions around the agreement remain unanswered, his G7 counterparts offered congratulations and pledges to back up Trump's deal with diplomatic support and military hardware.
I've given President Trump my word. We want to do our bit to help ensure that peace is achieved. This may also mean recognizing that we are part of this, that we are using military means to help ensure the freedom of navigation for the Strait of Hormuz in the long term, as soon as the relevant conditions, which you're all familiar with, are met.
And with Trump in a deal-making mood, Europeans seized the moment to shift the dial on the other war dominating the agenda. Leaders came prepared. They wanted to convince Trump to get tougher on Russia and secure a seat at the table for future peace talks. Host Emmanuel Macron made sure Ukraine's President Zelensky got an invitation and plenty of FaceTime with the US president. And Trump's rhetoric did shift.
Look, Russia should make a deal. Russia's lost tremendous amounts of people.
That was the statement the G7 and President Zelensky had been hoping for.
All G7 partners will step up pressure on Moscow, including through sanctions. This set a new tone in transatlantic unity and determination. It might take us a crucial step forward towards peace negotiations.
Well prepared, behind closed doors, discussions in a small circle appeared to have paid off. Donald Trump shifted his position and joined the common statement to strengthen the sanctions on Russia, including those on oil and gas.
I, for one, have always trusted President Trump because I've always been honest with him. When we have disagreements, we own up to them. But whenever he made a commitment to us, he always kept it. That was what he had committed to. And now today, the United States of America has made a commitment on this issue.
For the first time in a long while, the 7 partners are in agreement, both in their assessment of the situation and in the conclusions they have drawn from it. Now that has to be implemented. Trump kept the details vague. Looking ahead, this G7 summit could prove to be an important milestone. If, in the coming weeks or months, new negotiations with Russia do begin, with Europe at the table, then these days in Evian may have helped to set that process back in motion. To try and get there, Europe flexed all its diplomatic muscle, and it seems to have paid off.
I'm the boss.
Perhaps the gifts and parties helped to keep an unpredictable president in a good mood. A German football top for the 47th US president, as his country co-hosts the World Cup. And Macron rolled out the red carpet with a lavish dinner at the Palace of Versailles.
I'm a fan of beautiful places. And I was leaving in the afternoon, and then the French president, who happens to be a very nice man, invited me to dinner at Versailles. And Versailles is not a gold leaf. Versailles is the real deal. And I said, I'd like to do it.
At last year's G7 summit, Trump took off early. So just keeping him here in France will be seen as a success. But keeping him on side and delivering results will be the bigger challenge for Europe when the red carpets are rolled away.
All right, for more, I want to go now to our Europe correspondent, Rosie Birchard. She joins me now from Evian in France. She's been following the summit for us. Rosie, the host country, France, reportedly calling this one of the best G7 summits ever. Was it?
That's certainly how multiple different leaders are describing it. I've been in the room with President Macron, who was hosting this, and President Trump, who's just been speaking. They both seem to be very happy with how things went. But I would say there seem to be some big divergences below the surface here. And let me first point to Ukraine, because President Macron talked at length about this summit marking a turning point. Essentially, the Europeans think they have managed to really convince President Trump to change his mind, to get tougher on Russia. But I've just sat through about an hour of President Trump speaking, and I don't think he mentioned Ukraine for more than a minute of that. So there do seem to be some kind of differences of how exactly this is viewed between these two sides. That being said, both saying it was a good summit which was worthwhile.
I know that the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he gave a positive assessment ahead of this final day. He spoke of new harmony, progress regarding, believe it or not, Ukraine as well as Iran. Do the other heads of state and government, do they see it the same way, even if they're not saying that out loud?
Most of them are saying it out loud, Brett. They really are saying this is a moment of convergence, of harmony. And let's not forget, this is against a backdrop of months of bitter disagreements. And that's something President Macron pointed to himself. He said this is a moment of great fracturing. The point in these kind of summits is beyond the declarations that are signed. And it is important to note there were 9 different declarations that were released signed by all of the G7 leaders. So that includes President Trump, on everything from tackling Ebola to how to approach regulating tech for children, for example. So there seems to be more of a convergence than many thought there might be going into these talks. That being said, we know that this just has been a moment of profound transatlantic rupture, and I think most analysts will see this as something more of papering over cracks than necessarily a big coming back together. And of course, President Trump wanted to talk extensively about his so-called deal with Iran, that memorandum of understanding.
Yet you use the term transatlantic rupture. I'm wondering, have we reached a level where agreeing to disagree or even papering over that is now seen as a success in and of itself?
Yep, I would say that's a really exactly the right assessment. And it would be worth noting that, if you were looking at a year ago, there was so much more of a sense of panic among Europeans, but there has been work done in that year to essentially try and face up to a world with less of the US involved. Think of all the Europeans have been doing with regards to so-called tech sovereignty, so trying to have their own AI or cloud platforms. They rely on the US so much for that. And an EU-US trade deal has just been greenlit by the European side. That was seen as a really bad deal, but I think it was also seen as a bit of a wake-up call for Europeans to say, okay, we need to get used to a world where the US simply is an unpredictable partner. And I think unpredictability is also something they'll be thinking about when it comes to the Middle East.
Let me ask you, too, before we run out of time, about artificial intelligence. I mean, what came out of this summit regarding AI?
So the big question going into it was about the use of the Anthropic and its frontier AI model. So the US has taken steps to essentially bar access to some of that technology to foreign nationals. That is something which has upset G7 partners. And French President Emmanuel Macron tried to put it in a kind of nice way. He said, look, as democracies, we need to work together, and barring each other, essentially not cooperating as democracies, is not a way forward. That's something which they didn't really seem to agree on. And really interesting that we saw not only world leaders, which is usually on the guest list for these G7 summits, but also a group of tech CEOs, the men that are controlling access to AI, were also joining these leaders for lunch. That is something that we haven't seen before.
All right, DW's Rosie Birchard wrapping up this G7 summit for us from France. Rosie, thank you. Trump's counterparts, they may have chuckled for the boss, but what is at stake is certainly no laughing matter. This debate is more than just Iran. It touches on trade, defense, Ukraine, NATO, and it asks, is the relationship between Europe and the United States undergoing a temporary crisis or a historic transformation? Well, that question is at the heart of a new book, Transatlantic Fracture, the erosion of U.S.-European relations in an unstable order. Unstable is perhaps the most important word in that title. And one of the authors is with me here tonight in the studio. For decades, Jackson Janes has been one of the most influential interpreters of the transatlantic relationship, advising policymakers and engaging with American presidents, German chancellors, lawmakers, and diplomats on both sides of the Atlantic. Jack, it's good to have you here in the studio. It's good to have you back here with us, too, in Berlin. I want to start, if we can, with what we've been seeing right now with Iran, and based on what we're learning right now concerning this deal, which we're going to find out on Friday, the details. But based on what we already know, what does it tell Europe about U.S. leadership?
That is unpredictable, and it's not quite clear how that's going to change, even if another crisis like this was to occur. I mean, the fact of the matter is that they have been more or less to kind of watching from the sidelines as this war went into its 100th day. Mm-hmm. And I think that now that it's over, or supposed to be over, they will undoubtedly be involved in trying to figure out what they do about the cleanup of this, the remnants of the war. But it does show that you have a very transactional president who wants to act on his own.
A transactional president, and have we reached a low where it's just good when leaders get together and they're able to agree to disagree?
I don't think it's that easy, because you have one part of that discussion coming from someone who really is often saying, it's my way or the highway. Mm-hmm. And so while I think these kind of gatherings kind of are still important, whether they be G7, G20, or whatever you want, there is still a great deal of problems when people are not in compromise mode.
You know, this is not just another difficult chapter in transatlantic relations. Your book is called Transatlantic Fracture, and that's a strong word, right? Yeah. Fracture. Has it already happened? I mean, are we in a fundamentally different chapter now?
We may be. I mean, I think that there are always three things involved in our way of dealing with each other. It involves looking at interests, it looks at values, and it looks at threats. Mm-hmm. And if we don't find a consensus within that particular triangle, it's going to make it that much more difficult to find solutions to respond to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're in a position now where we have to really take a second look, because up until, I would say over the last several decades, we've had these things on a constant situation with the transatlantic. This is nothing new. Mm-hmm. But in this case, I think we're dealing with some problems that involve a fracture, or at least in a sense, an uncertainty about the consensus around those three issues.
What informs you the most about this change? I mean, are you hearing, because I know you talk with lawmakers on both sides of the Atlantic, are you hearing a consensus still exists about where we are and where we're headed?
No. I mean, I think that there is still a great deal of discussion about, that's the reason we talked about in a changing international order, about who is on whose side and who is interested in moving around with us in terms of either economic issues or security issues, or even, for that matter, looking at what it is that we want to do together vis-a-vis the other big elephant in the room, which is China. Mm-hmm. So I think that we're in a process of transition about defining those three issues, mm-hmm. the interests, the threats, mm-hmm. and the values that go with.
You know, one of the most provocative arguments in your book is you say that Trump's second term may ultimately be remembered for democratic backsliding in the United States. I mean, that is a serious claim, an indictment to make against a U.S. president.
Well, he has basically spent a good deal of his time, and that goes right back to 2016, in undermining the confidence of our electoral system. And he's doing that right now in the second term, even more so. And I think that, by laying the groundwork for calling elections fraud even before they happen, mm-hmm. I think that's another way of weakening the trust that people should have in the system. By the way, that's another factor, in addition to the three I mentioned, that is so important to maintain, and we're not necessarily in a good spot there.
You know that Trump supporters now, they argue that Trump was elected to disrupt the institutions. They say the institutions that have failed to work for the people. And we hear the same thing on this side of the Atlantic, all across Europe. You've got these populist parties that are picking up on that. I mean, it's not going away.
No, it's something that we have to take seriously. There's a reason that we have to understand what has happened, for example, in the United States, but not only there, that has caused this backlash effect across all of the borders in Europe and in the United States. And the question is, what caused that? But more importantly, what's going to cause us to remedy it? Because those factors involved in what it is that people are engaging in their respective societies has to be based on trust, and we have a minimum of that at the moment.
Does your book, Jack, does it suggest the greatest challenge to the transatlantic relationship may actually be coming from inside the United States?
Well, I think it's part of the discovery of the kind of shortcomings of the last years, not just one decade, but maybe several, where people feel left behind. That wasn't just in the United States. But the United States has a big impact on not only, in terms of talking about whether we are having a better situation in the United States. We impact everywhere. We're global. And so I think that the problem is not so much that it's going to come from the United States as a unique situation. It's just that we represent so many different ways in which people are unhappy with their government. And that's true in a lot of different places. And that I think is the problem that we're facing that we've got to jointly solve.
You know, Donald Trump, he has said nonstop that Europe must do more for itself. It has to spend more money for its own defense. And that seems to be working. I mean, if you just think about the scenes that we saw the past couple of days, where you saw the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, giving this football shirt to Trump. I mean, it looks like flattery will get you everywhere. I mean, you could argue that it has worked.
Well, I think basically people are aware that, as never before, that Europe has got to step up its game. And that was something that was well overdue. There's no question about that. I don't think that that issue was caused by Trump, but Trump was just calling it out. But I think that the awareness of it is much more widespread. And the question is, can we find a situation where the partnership of the transatlantic relationship can be more enhanced by appreciating the fact that we both have to pull on the same oar?
Well, you've got leaders here in Europe, and I'm thinking of French President Macron talking about strategic autonomy. You know, there should be greater military autonomy. Is that a realistic goal? I mean, it may sound good.
It sounds good, but it's basically for domestic consumption. I mean, the fact of the matter is that it's not a time for people to be flinging letters across the Atlantic asking for divorce. This is an opportunity to really think about what it is that we can do, must do, ought to do in terms of dealing with the problems which are much bigger than ourselves.
You have spent much of your career, I've seen you in action, explaining Europe to Americans and then explaining Americans to Europe. What is the biggest misconception that each side has about the other?
Diversity.
Diversity.
Diversity of the individual societies fighting within their own contexts about issues that deal with the future and not only the future, but also the past.
So you mean they see each other as a monolith?
I think so, and I think that's a problem because, you know, when you talk about the Americans, it's not all one particular side of the political fence. And that's true in all the other societies. And so I think we have to get a much better sense of talking about what it is that we are discussing among ourselves individually in our individual countries, but try to explain to others about that and also make sure that we understand that that's also going on elsewhere.
Before we let you go, what gives you the confidence that this relationship is going to survive? Because the jury is still out.
I think we have already got evidence of that. We've got 8 decades behind us. We've managed these kinds of problems before. And the basic question, Brent, is what is the alternative? And I think that we've got that particular answer already if we take a closer look.
All right. Well, always the optimist there. Jackson James, it's always good to have you in the studio. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And the book is coming out, right?
It's out.
Okay, it's out. All right. Thank you.
My pleasure.